please let me know. Miss Neighbor?
Is it all right to move to have them approved, or you've already done that?
If there's no objection.
If there's no objection, thank you. I think they're beautifully done. I would love to move.
Okay, well,
Can I
Miss
move
Neighbor
down
has
there?
moved to have them approved. So, all right. Consider them approved then, and we'll move on. We're going to start it with a hearing on, and I'm trying to lean into this mic because I think we're hearing. If there's any problem hearing me, please just let me know, and we'll kick it up some more. We're going to have a hearing on House Bill 2032. It's authorizing the State Corporation Commission to increase or decrease an electric public utilities return on equity based on whether such utilities all-in average retail rate has increased or decreased. So you want to explain that to us, Mr. Myers?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think I can stand for questions. My goodness. So yeah, that hits it, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So real quick, House Bill 2032, this would authorize the Kansas Corporation Commission to, as the chairman said, order an increase or a decrease to the electric public utilities return on equity, depending upon whether the retail rates of that utility increase or decrease over the prior calendar year. So when we're talking return on equity, what you're thinking of with this part of the rate making process is the return on investment, on capital investment. And this also, people say this is the return that's given to shareholders. I mean, this is the return that capital investment is provided to shareholders. So this is the component that would be adjusted under this bill. So if the electric public utility presents evidence at a hearing to the KCC that their all-in average retail electric rate has not increased by more than 1% during the preceding calendar year, this bill would authorize the KCC to increase that return on equity up to an amount that is at a 0.5% increase. So it's not necessarily exactly a 0.5% increase. It would give the KCC the discretion to increase it, if at all, up to a 0.5% increase above the utility's current return on equity. This provision in this bill would also require, if the utility is presenting evidence that their rate has not increased by more than that 1%, the public hearing would also have to be held in this case to show this evidence that the utility is presenting. In the converse, if the KCC finds upon a complaint or upon its own motion that the public utilities retail rates have actually increased beyond that 1% over the preceding calendar year, the KCC would have authority to decrease that return on equity up to an amount that is 0.5% below the utility's current return on equity filed in their last rate case. And these increases or decreases, if done by the KCC, would be valid under the bill for the subsequent 12-month period. And then the bill does provide a definition of all-in average retail rate. So this is all the rates, everything that goes into what is considered the all-in retail rates of a public utility. It includes all charges, fees, taxes, and surcharges and customer charges that are billed to customers. And Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I know it's a short bill, but it's quite dense, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Committee, questions? Well, it looks like you did a pretty good job. We may reserve the right to call on you again as we go through this, though.
Thank you.
So, all right. Well, first off, the bill was proposed by Mr. Schneider on behalf of Kansans for lower electric rates. So we're going to call on Mr. Schneider to start it off here. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul Snyder with Kansas for Lower Electric Rates and the Kansas Industrial Consumers Group. This is, appreciate the willingness to hear this bill. My presence here should be of no surprise to anyone that's been on this committee or new to this committee, as our name denotes we are looking for lower rates, for more competitive rates in Kansas. Since we started this initiative in 2018, we've been sounding the alarm about our uncompetitive rates in Kansas, and we've tried to do a few things here and there to try to address that. Several of them have been successful, others not. Every time we are successful, though, it seems like there's another avenue for Evergy to increase rates. It's kind of we describe it on my side as whack-a-mole. You hit one down, something else pops up. So we're really just looking for a different approach. As most of my testimonies in this committee usually have, I included several charts. The first is this chart of regional rates. The distinction that we bring on this, as opposed to some that would look at rates on a statewide basis, these are comparisons of Evergy's investor-owned utility peers and the surrounding states to Kansas. The raw data is on the back of my testimony if you want to dig into any of the numbers, but a couple highlights. Rates here are 20% higher residential rates than in Iowa, 15% higher than in St. Louis. On the commercial side, rates here are 38% higher than commercial rates in Oklahoma, 32% higher than in Iowa. And industrial rates are 43% higher in Kansas than in Iowa, and 22% higher than Oklahoma. So clearly there's issues as it comes to commerce and industry, but anyone that pays an electric bill, that's residential customers, school districts, libraries, hospitals, you name it, everyone, those that can relocate and decide to come to Kansas, that is a factor that they certainly consider. And I mentioned we've been trying to find solutions to this. And as I mentioned, whack-a-mole, just Friday night, Evergy filed a new rate case, which I'm sure Chuck will address at some level, but here we go again. Just 2 years ago, we had a rate case. Last year, we had a bill that allowed Evergy to accrue some rate pressures, if you will, and then now here we're in the middle of a rate case again. So as Nick pointed out, this bill is really simple. I don't know that we've had a bill that fits on one page before. Maybe we have, I don't know. I've proposed a lot of stuff over the years, but no doubt that this bill, it is a simple concept, and that's really what I'm wanting people to focus on. Instead of the dynamic where utilities make money for spending money, we need to come up with a way where they can make money for other things, incent them to do the behavior that we're looking for. In our case, that is lower, more regionally competitive rates. So as Nick mentioned, the bill allows the KCC to adjust the return on equity up to 0.5% or 50 basis points. If Evergy can keep rate increases to 1% or below, it allows them to decrease their ROE or return on equity the same amount if the rates go over 1%. Now, I'm not certain that 1% is the right amount. Maybe it should be 2% or some other number. I'm not really sure. I think what we are, to some degree, putting our faith into the KCC and others, and maybe Chuck has a suggestion on what an appropriate number would be. But again, the focus that we're trying to do is give the commission tools so that they can properly adjust and regulate Evergy. I want to talk a little bit about return on equity and why that is the appropriate tool and lever for the KCC. So when rates are set, things like salaries and fuel, taxes, those are all just passed on. Where utilities make their money is by the money that they invest in what's called a rate base. So as Evergy builds a power plant, they have wires, poles, some stations, all those investments go into a big bucket of money called a rate base. That rate base, in simple terms, is multiplied by the return on equity, and that is the money that is generated for them to reimburse shareholders for their investment. So as the rate base goes up, so does the total amount of money that goes to shareholders. And then also, as the return on equity, that percentage also, if it goes up, that also means more money to shareholders. If it were to go down, that would mean less money for shareholders. If you need additional explanation, I can try and provide a chart. But in simple terms, that's what we're talking about. We think that capital spending is what has driven our rates to an uncompetitive level. And capital spending is also what is going to prevent us from achieving the regionally competitive rates that we would like to see in Kansas. The commission has noted that multiple times. I put in one reference in my testimony. They had an order where they said the commission's also concerned with new Evergy projections for future spending increases. And again, there were other instances that the commission has ordered, yet that has had little, if any, impact, and I would argue no impact on Evergy. I've got this chart on, I think, the third page of my testimony. Capital spending has increased 165% since 2018. And just to step back a little bit, Evergy is the product of Western Resources, or Westar, and Kansas City Power and Light. Each of them had independent 5-year capital projections. When they were going through the merger deliberation, if you add up those two capital spending plans, it was about $6.8 billion. One of the conditions, or at least merits of the merger, they said, hey, look, synergies, economy of scale, we can reduce this capital spending dollar amount to $6.1 billion. Everyone was like, okay, let's move forward. That's a good plan. That lasted about 6 months. And then Evergy forecast new 5-year data, and that started the trend where every 6 months, they're basically adding $1 billion or more to their 5-year capital spending plan. Again, as you increase spending, that increases the calculation for how much money is going to go back to shareholders. So every time they spend money, shareholders benefit. And let me be clear, we are not asking Evergy to not spend money. Obviously, you need to do that. Things depreciate, you need to replace them, but we would like to get back on historic spending levels and spending levels that recognize where we are relative to other states. We're never going to get out of the situation that we're in today if we continue to spend money on this trajectory. Nick also mentioned that this is an all-in rate, and that is supposed to, we've talked a lot in here about transmission delivery charges. That is a surcharge, particularly on Evergy Central bills, that is very significant. And I have a chart in here on page 4 that kind of shows the increases that we've seen in the TDC. This committee in 2023 made some changes to the TDC, which were helpful. You saw the decrease the next year, but then by the following year, we're right back up, going in the right the upward direction on rates. And then at the same time, the SPP has recently kind of unveiled a massive, unprecedented spending plan where we're going to see rates further increase over the next 10 years for SPP transitions and investments, and that's a story for another day, but clearly it's an issue, and that's why we wanted to incorporate it in this bill as well. So in general, or in summary rather, our charge to you is think creatively with us. What are ways that we can change the dynamic so that every time Evergy gets a mandate or an inclination to spend money, they can, and that results in more revenue for their shareholders. We need to break that dynamic, provide different ways for them to make money. This is a way that they can achieve extra money, and also a good deterrent for the KCC, a stick, if you will, if they're not doing what the KCC would like. So urge your support for this, and Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Committee questions for Mr. Snyder? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul, thank you. That first part, when you first started, you say so-and-so pays so much more. Is that on our list here? I can't find it.
It is. The data that backs all that up is on this last page of my testimony.
Okay.
And again, these are Evergy peers, investor-owned utilities that are regulated the same way, going after the same shareholder capital, et cetera. And all these states around us, with the exception maybe Arkansas, have our leaders in wind energy, all have good reliability. So at the end of the day, I would certainly say there's a way to have low rates and good reliability. We just need to find that sweet spot.
And You know, we're looking at possibly building 2 power plants in Wellington and Hutchinson. So we're gonna spend money. So how does the stockholders make money when we're spending money?
So that will be a bonus to shareholders so the proposal is to spend roughly $2 billion on new gas plants, $1 billion for each. And of course, there's I'm not going to get real into the depths of that because there's a commission proceeding on that, but that will be heavily scrutinized whether, number one, whether there is load to support the need for those plants and whether building those gas plants are the best way to meet that new load. So there's going to be a lot of conversation about that. But in general, whether Evergy's building a new transmission line, a new substation, or a new power plant, that capital investment generates revenue for their shareholders.
But that revenue's down the line, isn't it?
Except for transmission expenses, which they have a surcharge that recovers that money and capital on an annual basis, they have to spend the money and then they go in through a rate case and get to recover that money. Now, there is a difference this last year. We allowed construction work in progress for the gas plants. And so as they start to build those gas plants, they'll be able to go to the commission and if they're approved, levy a surcharge to start collecting some of that money as they're being built. But in general terms, they have to build it first and then go get the money when it's in service.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A pleasure to be here this morning with you. Mr. Snyder, I've been on this committee for about 12 years now. This is the best white paper, I think, that I've seen since I've been here. And I know I intend to take my copy with me so I can sit down and study it. And I hope other members will do likewise. I want to make sure, though, that I understand what you're explaining to us. If Evergy doesn't spend any more money on capital improvements, they don't build generating plants, they don't do whatever else falls within capital improvements. All they do is take their existing assets, generate electricity, and sell it to poor schmucks like me. How do they make any money on that sort of an arrangement, given what you've explained to us? Do they make any money selling electricity?
Yes and no. From a shareholder perspective, that money is derived from capital investments. If they were to sell more electricity than they were planning on, so rates are set, the commission looks at an assumption of you're going to sell 1 million kilowatt hours next year. If they sell 1,000,001 kilowatt hour, that one is extra money for Evergy. Now, at the same time, if they sell 995,000 kilowatt hours, that's on them. They lose out on that revenue. But so there's some opportunity through the sale of electricity, but it's hard for a utility company to prompt more sales. They can't really control that. They don't know if there's going to be a recession or a Panasonic comes on board and all of a sudden you've got a lot more revenue coming in the door. What they can control is how much they spend. And so every year, in addition to new money that they spend, when you put an asset into rates, it also comes with a depreciation schedule. We expect a utility pole to last 40 years. And so every year, there's things that depreciate out of the rate base and things that go into the rate base. So I think annual depreciation on Evergy Central is about $800 million, if I recall correctly. So if spending is limited to $800 million or below, rates are going to go down or at least stay the same. It's when we start investing more than we're depreciating that there's upward pressure on rates.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I'm a political science major. I have absolutely no idea what he just said. Could I try to ask a second question? Let's go to the other end of this perspective because that answer honestly made no sense to me. Sorry. Let's talk about capital investment and borrowing, okay? Or for that matter, selling shares on the market, however Evergy raises its capital to do its business. If if they spend $1,000 on a new generating station, even though they really cost billions, but they spend $1,000 on a new generating station and they get a 10.5%, say, rate of return, which is, I think, less than what their true rate of return is, but 10.5%. That, I think, means that every year that $1,000 is outstanding and undepreciated, that their shareholders would make $150, or no, $1,500. Is that generally correct?
It'd be 150, if it's
$150.
$1,000.
$1,000. It's early in the morning for a
Understand.
boy like me. They'd make $150.
That's correct.
But if they don't spend any money on capital investment, they just run their existing generator instead. They don't borrow any money. They don't go to the capital markets or sell stock, either one. Then they don't make anything because they're not borrowing any more money, additional money. Is that the way that kind of works? So if you're Evergy, in order to make money, you've got to spend money on more plants, more wires, more things that are called capital investment so that you can get your 10.5 or 14% or whatever the real rate of return is. Is that right?
That's correct.
But if you don't spend money on these things, your shareholders don't make any money. So there's a financial incentive to spend as much money as they possibly can on capital investments. Is that the way this works?
Correct.
And so finally then, Mr. Chairman, the capital investments, did you say they seemingly, the projected capital investments just keep going up every year, geometrically exploding over the past 5 or 10 years?
That is what the data shows.
That's very disturbing, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Paul. A couple of questions, if I could, is in the bill, you reference in several places all-in average retail rates. But on your testimony, all I see are electric rates. I know Justin Grady from the KCC has presented, I think it was last year, information on all-in costs to customers about in a regional basis compared to just the utility rate. So I guess I don't know if you can get it, or maybe we can ask Justin. I think he's just written only today, but if there's a way to update that table that he provided, I think it was last year, about what really people are paying totally, including surcharges, taxes, et cetera.
I think that I have been on record disagreeing with the approach that Justin takes in that.
I think I remember that.
To look at the actual rate that they pay, not the bill. And in general, since you mentioned it, the issue is that if rates are the same here as they are in Oklahoma people run their air conditioner more, it's going to look like they have higher rates, but they don't.
It's what comes out of the billfold, I understand. But the rate, I mean, we could have a very long argument on that over a cold beverage, but the bill talks about all-in retail rates. It doesn't talk about just retail rates.
So I can confer, the way I read that, it is the rates that make up a bill, not bills.
It's defined as the total cost of electricity a retail customer pays per kilowatt hour and includes all charges, fees, taxes, surcharges, and customer charges. But your testimony only identifies the rate that's approved through the commission.
I guess I'm not seeing the distinction in your question. So we can follow up offline, or we can continue, given the committee's indulgence.
And one last, if I can, is I know there's concern with the capital expenditures, but are you familiar with the NERC study about the future of the grid here in the United States and about the need for additional generation and transmission?
Yes, it corresponds with my proposal to build a wall around Kansas and just take care of ourselves.
Okay. Will that be in the rate base? I'm just kidding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Is Eric Stafford in here? If you're in, oh, there you are. We've been looking around, couldn't see you. Eric with the Kansas Chamber, welcome to the committee, sir.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm hiding in the corner to avoid having to stand directly in front of Chuck and Laura. So I know I might be at risk here. Just kidding. Good morning. Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Kansas Chamber, here in support of House Bill 2032. We've stood before, well, for new members of the committee, we've stood before this committee a lot in the last few years as utility bills and utility rates have become a top concern for our members, especially in the manufacturing sector. And this is, it's tough to do. It's tough to support the utility when you want reliability, but then at the same time, see the numbers and how they've come in as Paul outlined, and not question what's necessary in terms of supporting the electric system in the state of Kansas, but also ignoring our members and the ratepayers who are frustrated with their rising utility rates. Back in 2010-ish, we were top 15 in the country in terms of our electric rates, and now we're 32nd, 35th, around there. So we've significantly worsened our positioning. That said, Evergy has their natural gas plants that they have before the KCC. We did file to intervene, but we did file to intervene because there very well could be a legitimate need for those facilities. If any of you, I think Representative Melton and Representative Penn, I think are the two committee members who are on both Commerce and Utilities on the House side. We had our economist who's updating our competitiveness report for the state of Kansas that should be ready later this month. And he outlined kind of what he's seeing nationally. They're working with 27 state chambers currently, but half of their business is that data analysis, competitiveness, where states can improve. And their other half is working with businesses, large investors, where they want to relocate or create new facilities across the country. And one of the top concerns, I think he said, if I remember right from his presentation last week, for the first time in site selection, the top concern is energy availability. That businesses looking to expand or relocate or invest in facilities, they need to be sure that there is energy available. So that is a balance that Evergy has to be sensitive of as well. We've heard about data centers and those conversations that are taking place. So this is not I used to think healthcare was the most complex issue that we had to engage in, and hands down, it's energy policy. So I am not envious of your position sitting on that side of the table. But we have to find a way to start protecting ratepayers from the ever-increasing rates. And that is a problem that we have within our membership. We worked last year very closely with Evergy on the legislation authorizing the new financing mechanisms for the natural gas facilities. Those were very, very positive conversations. We were appreciative for being at the table with them, but it doesn't take away the pain that we're seeing, not necessarily from the rate themselves, the kilowatt hour, the fuel source, but the additional surcharges that are growing on our customers' bills, again, especially on the manufacturing side. Because electricity is not deregulated like natural gas. You can build your own pipeline to your facility and have a natural gas supply that you directly purchase. We don't have that in the state of Kansas on the electrical side, nor do I think it would potentially work. I don't think we're a big enough state to have economies of scale to allow full deregulation on the electricity side. But Representative Schreiber mentioned NERC and SPP and what FERC might do. And I've had conversations last week even with some energy attorneys that, well, the SPP we are limited in what we can do because of what the SPP is saying. And it's like, well, yeah, that's not right. But what do we need in the state of Kansas? And I get the region is important. But I don't know, it just all ties together. But in terms of the capital spending and what we can do to incentivize behavior, I think what Paul is trying to get at and KIC is trying to get at is, I think that's the key takeaway for the hearing today is incentivizing the right behavior. Do we need to spend money so to make the shareholders happy, or do we spend what we need to keep the grid happy? Let the shareholders be, but let's make the ratepayers happy. Because the ratepayers, I can tell you from our membership, they're frustrated. We're 7 years into these discussions, 8 years into these discussions where it's just continues to be frustration. We do appreciate the partnership with Evergy. Like I said, last year, our conversations and negotiations were very, very positive, very, very effective. I think everybody got what they wanted at the end of the day in a good proposal. But there still remains the frustration from our ratepayers within our membership, and that's why we're here in support of this bill today. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Questions for Mr. Stafford? Seeing any? Thank you for for being here. Is there anyone else that wishes to testify as a proponent? Not seeing any. I've got a written only proponent from Randy Stuckey, Kansas Grain and Feed, also representing Kansas Agribusiness Retailers and Renew Kansas Biofuels Association. Let's move down to opponents. If I could have Mr. Chuck Casely with Evergy.
Chair Delperdang, I apologize. I'm just getting over a cold, so I have a little bit of a frog in my throat today. Hopefully it won't be too much of an impediment. I'd like to welcome our freshman vice chair to this committee. It's a pleasure seeing you over here, members of the committee. You know, I always love this time of year because I am always astounded at how nefarious Paul can make investing in infrastructure and electricity to power the economy of the state, and how it seems like when I listen to him, all we do it for is so our shareholders can get rich. So I'd like to address both the bill and some of the things that have been discussed this morning. We oppose the bill principally because it is a solution in search of a problem. When Paul was up here, he talked about the formation of KIC and KLER in 2018. Well, that's a good time to go back to because that's when Evergy was formed. Evergy was formed between what was Westar, which was headquartered here in Topeka, and a merger with Kansas City Power and Light in Kansas City. And since that time, he was right. One of the things that we said when we formed the company was this would bring economies of scale and would help us significantly mitigate rate increases. So using that time frame, let's just go back to the last rate cases that both Westar and KCP&L had, which would have been in 2017 as separate companies, and look at what's happened between that time and today. Evergy Kansas Central, which is the old Westar service territory, has gone up 5.6%, all in rates for residential customers, 5.6%. That's over a 7-year time period. That is less than 1% on average all in a year. So one question I'd have is maybe they give us that extra ROE retroactively since we did such a good job by the definition of this bill over the last 7 years. How did we do that? Well, we did that by reducing our operations and maintenance budget by over $320 million. That means $320 million we don't spend every single solitary year as a result of that merger and as a result of tightening our belts. Now, unlike other companies who see, you know, when they sell more, when they do more, the amount they spend goes up. We have more customers today than we did in 2018. We are selling and making more electricity, but our absolute costs to operate the company are down more than $300 million. And that's why we could get to 5.6% over that time period. In Evergy, Kansas Metro, which is the Johnson County portion, We're under 2% in that time period, and it's the lowest increase over that period of time in the United States. So we're doing a good job on being competitive and making sure that rates are competitive. Now, Representative Schreibers, you know what, pointed something out, right? Which is bills for residential customers, bills for commercial customers, bills for industrial customers, share of income, percentage of cost of goods sold. Electricity is actually very, very competitive. But you heard Mr. Snyder say, well, he's on record as being against that metric. Well, I'd submit to you he's against that metric because it doesn't support his case. Over the same time period, let's take a look at what's happened in our neighboring states, the states that we compete with for business. Oklahoma has gone up 15.8% in that same time period. Colorado, 23%. Missouri, 11%. Arkansas, 19%. And the consumer price index, inflation, which affects how we are able to, how far our dollars go to, just like it does a residential consumer, is up 26% over that time period. By any measure, if you look at how our rates have increased over that time period, especially including inflation, we have done a good job and continue to do a good job. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the Kansas Corporation Commission already has this authority. When we come in for a rate case, and we are in for a rate case right now in Evergy, Kansas Central, they have the authority to look at all the factors and set our return on equity. So this is literally something that they already have the authority to do. Third thing is, and I believe that, again, Representative Schreiber made reference to this. In all-in rates, a lot of things are outside of our control. What's outside of our control? Well, we have taxes. We don't set the taxes. State does. Local property taxes. Those are not set by us, and those increase or decrease, mostly increase, except in this body, set by multiple jurisdictions all over our service territory. Franchise fees, also something we do not control. We do not control spending on storms. 2024 was the most active storm year that our company has ever had. So we can make a choice under this bill, which is to be slower, not do as much in restoring for storms, because that's going to increase our all-in rates. I don't think you want us benefiting from making decisions that would hurt customers or for things that are outside of our control, and I don't think you want to disincentivize us. If you all remember the polar vortex from several years ago, we spent in the vicinity for Evergy, Kansas Central, in the vicinity of $300 or $400 million more to procure natural gas and other power to supply our customers during that time period. I don't think you want to disincentivize us and tell us if you do that we're going to penalize you. I think people want their heat. I think companies want to run their manufacturing. Schools want to be on when those kinds of things occur. But probably the biggest thing that I wanted to talk about today is this notion around our investment. So let's be really, really clear. One of the things that Mr. Snyder showed you was a chart that shows our increasing CapEx. That's very, very true. Our CapEx is going up because we have a historic need around both generation and aging transmission and distribution infrastructure, the electrical grid. On average, you're looking at transmission lines and transmission poles that are about 40 years old. We have to get those replaced. The truth of the matter is we could double, if we had the credit capacity, the amount of investment that we have, but we don't because we're trying to do it on a very fiscally conservative way. Now, we're all worried about competitive rates. So here's something that Mr. Snyder doesn't talk about. It's readily available and will also lead to more competitive rates. We are investing at a clip below the utilities in every single state that borders Kansas. What does that mean? If we're investing more, all the other utilities from the states that Mr. Snyder references are investing significantly more than we are, which means over time, you will see our rates continue to get more and more competitive. Finally, I would just say that, you know, the 1% notion here is arbitrary. We could have a lot of conversations about what the right number is, but the fact of the matter is, you don't want to put a cap on an essential service. You want us to perform that service. You want us to perform that service as efficiently as we humanly possibly can. And again, I would submit, as a combined company over the last 8 years, 7 to 8 years, we've done a better job than all of our peers in neighboring states. Final thing I would just say in closing is that, you know, we hear a lot of conversation about runaway investment. Well, our investment is probably the most scrutinized, one of the most scrutinized things that gets done in this state. Every year before the Kansas Corporation Commission, we have a CapEx review where we go in front of that board. They look at it, staff looks at it, CURB looks at it, even Mr. Snyder's clients get to look at it. And not once in the last several years that we have done this, it's a relatively new thing, has somebody pointed at a piece of investment and said, don't do this. This is a bad idea. We don't know, we don't need it. That's the first thing. Second thing is we have an integrated resource plan that looks at the generation and how we provide it. It is designed to find the least cost solution that will maximize reliability. Again, Mr. Snyder and his clients participate in that. It's a year-long process and people get to comment on it. Then we have something called predetermination, which just got expanded this last year. We increased the amount of time and rigor that the KCC has to look. Predetermination means if we're going to build a generating plant, a power plant, they get almost a year to look at it and say, this is a good decision or this is a bad decision. And then once all that is done and we've actually made the investment, then we come back in for a rate case and we look at prudency all over again. So there's 4 separate times, and in none of those times has anyone come up with a major or significant reduction to the investment that we do. At the end of the day, we have rate reviews that go on a regular basis. We have predetermination. We have a whole bunch of other things. And at the end of the day, the commission already has the ability to set our return on equity on what it believes, considering all factors, is competitive with neighboring states. And I would just add that for the last decade or so, the Kansas Corporation Commission has set that usually several hundreds of basis points below what the average is around the United States. So they're taking a very active and very scrutinizing role. For all those reasons, we are opposed. We are going to be back to talk both about the rate case that's upcoming this year, as well as other things in front of this committee later this year. Our CEO will be with us, but for now, I'd stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Casely. Questions, Mr. Schreiber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chuck. My question relates to Justin Grady's testimony. It was written only, but he made an assertion in there that if this bill becomes law, the electric utility may elect to file smaller and more frequent rate cases. Is that something that you would agree with? And if so, is that a good or a bad thing?
I think we would have to consider our options if this bill became law, and that might be one of the options. One of the options could very well be, though, just doing exactly what's being incentivized here, which is significantly less investment. In that circumstance, we wouldn't need to have predetermination for the 2 natural gas plants we announced last year, because we would stop those plans immediately. There's no way we can build those plants and stay within this guideline. And as you referenced, and it's out there very publicly to see, both of the last 3 winter and summer NERC studies have said that this region is a region that is in critical need of generation. And I would add, one of the reasons that's driving that is because Kansas and Missouri, the 2 places that we serve, are seeing significant economic growth, which wouldn't be happening if we weren't competitive in rates.
Mr. Carmichael?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Casely, always a pleasure to see you. You and I seldom, if ever, agree in this committee, and I doubt that we will today, but I always appreciate your company. You're very skilled at what you do. I'm going to leave it at that. 5% rate increase for Evergy Central over how long did you say, Chuck?
From 2017 through 2024, according to.
Last 7 years, okay. What impact, you all came to us a few years ago and you said, you know, if we do away with state income taxes on utilities like us, taxes that we really never pay but goes into the rate base, that's going to save money on your electric bill. And I understand that current President Trump, soon to be former president, it's only 3.5 more years, that Trump's tax plan also cuts your taxes. Congratulations. How much did that lower or reduce the increase in residential rates for my constituents in Evergy Central? Those two tax decisions.
So who knows what will happen with this Congress and the current president on taxes, but I would imagine if taxes are decreased, then that will be reflected in our rates. I honestly can't remember. It's been long enough now, Representative Carmichael. I can't remember what that amount is, but I'd be happy to get it to you. And it was a benefit to.
People have told me one of the reasons that rates for my constituents have not increased is because of changes in the federal tax code and the decision that Kansas made to say your company doesn't pay income taxes anymore.
Yeah, that was a portion of it, but it's by far the smallest portion of it. What has really helped is the more than $320 million out of our operating budget as a combined company that has been passed on to consumers.
Second thing, Mr. Chair, with your leave, is whack-a-mole, pending and contemplated rate increases, rate cases. Right now, for my constituents in Evergy Central, how many rate increase cases do you have before the KCC?
We have one.
And that is for what again?
It's investments in infrastructure. We've done about $1 billion of investment in infrastructure in Evergy, Kansas Central.
If you're successful in front of the KCC, how much will that increase my constituents' electric bill?
About 10% or right around $13.05 for a typical residential customer.
And if you get your generating plants approved, how much is that going to raise my constituents' electric bill?
Depends on what the final budget is, as well as what.
Based on what you've asked and presented, and I know it may vary eventually, but how much is that going to raise? We know we're up 10% for your operating expenses or whatever you just told me about. Whack-a-mole, how much more for your new generators?
I believe that when we announced those plants, we said, and I'd have to go back and verify this, but we said it'd be somewhere between 3% and 5% is what we anticipate.
So now we're up to 15%. All told, if I'm in this legislature 5 years from now, which I probably won't be, but if you're in this job, the president 5 years from now, what's going to be the projected difference in what my constituents pay for electricity? You've just told me it's going up at least 15% if you get what you ask for. How much should I put in my newsletter that my constituents' electric bills are going to go up in the next 5 years?
Well, that's really an impossible question to answer, because if we have the load growth or the customer growth that we anticipate, that will be a mitigating pressure on it. If we have tax cuts, as you suggest, could be coming, that would be a mitigating factor on it. We still are net down in our operating budget year over year, so we're going to continue to work on saving. All of those things will offset any investment that we do. Also, as we invest more, our annual depreciation grows, which also offsets this. And then I would say finally, as we look to the future, in that time period, a lot will depend on what the commodity price of natural gas is. If it remains at historic lows, then you could see these plants put, in some respects, and from an operating perspective, downward pressure on rates. But if we see storage and transmission and just the availability of the commodity start to increase, that'll affect it as well. So there's really too many factors to say, but what I can tell you is that we won't get the 10% in this rate increase, although obviously we feel like the investments we made warrant it. And, you know, then we'll see, probably, it's around 2031, I think, that those plants will be online. And so we'll look at a rate case after that as well.
Mr. Chair, we don't have time to
No,
talk
in the
today
name of
about
time, I
anything
really need to
further.
cut you off, but all due respect.
No, I fully understand. I can't limit how long Chuck takes to answer a simple question.
Understand.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Further questions? Ms. Bohai?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. My question is regarding the CapEx increase from the original merger, if you will, to now. Is it because we didn't realize it was going to be, we would need to be replacing things because they were getting 40 years old, or is it because of inflation?
Well, so there's really three things
Okay.
that impact it. You did hit one, which is inflation. Inflation has been just crazy in terms of all the things that we need to invest in the system. Probably the least of which actually is labor, but all the raw materials, the steel, the cables, all of that has gone up between 25 and 40, in some cases 50% over that time period. So that's one. The second thing is, and this often gets mischaracterized by stakeholders to this conversation, when we combined the company, we purposely, for a year or two, decided to go way below what would be an annual investment or capital investment level. And that was because we had a significant amount of debt and we had a significant amount of stock outstanding, and we needed to turn around and recapitalize the business. So we put it on a pause essentially for a year and a half or 2 years, and we're not investing at a sustainable level. And then the third thing I would say is the requirements from a federal level on what it takes to operate the grid, whether it's the reserve margins for energy, whether it is reliability standards, plus just the fact that with onshoring, reshoring, and the growth in electricity use that we're seeing today, it's unlike we've seen for many, many years, and that is also driving a need for the investment that you're seeing.
Make it quick. I'm watching the clock.
So then is this a more typical increase because we're no longer on that pause? So should we, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what we should continue to have.
I don't know that you'll see significant further increases in our CapEx, although CapEx also comes with new load and new customers, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of that. The economic growth that we're seeing now is unparalleled in my 18 years. And so if that continues to happen, you'll continue to see capital investment to meet those new customers. The good news is they pay for that, and they also pay a portion of the fixed cost of the grid, which means that it should have a downward pressure ultimately on rates. And the other thing that is a mitigating factor is that we're spending less than every other investor utility, investing less than every other investor utility that we compete with, which means relatively we're still going to be more competitive than our neighboring states.
All right. Mr. Casely, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other opponents would like to talk? Seeing any, we're moving on to neutral. Mr. Reagan McLeod with KEC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I can be extremely brief. We provided neutral testimony here because we aren't commenting on the contents of the bill necessarily. Just I think unintended consequence that we foresee. I provided a possible amendment at the end of my testimony pertaining to one of our members' wholly owned subsidiaries, Southern Pioneer Electric, headquartered in Ulysses, Kansas. They're a not-for-profit electric utility, wholly owned subsidiary of Pioneer Electric Cooperative in Ulysses, Kansas as well. A not-for-profit electric company that is run and operated like a cooperative. So the amendment essentially indicates that wholly owned subsidiaries of electric cooperatives are not intended to be included in this legislation. With that, I can stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Any questions for Mr. McLeod? Not seeing any. Thank you for being here, sir. I also show, well, is there anybody else who would like to talk as far as a neutral? I don't see any. So I show written testimony only neutral from Joseph Curb and Justin Grady with the KCC. So with that, I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2032. Thank you. Now let's move on to House Bill 2109, authorizing public utilities and law enforcement agencies to enter into pole attachment agreements. Mr. Myers, what are we doing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, so you may remember last year we had a bill, House Bill 2589, that you all ended up passing out of committee with a couple of amendments, or one amendment adopted and then one amendment considered. This House Bill 2109 is essentially a new version of that bill. And what this bill would do is it would enact a new section of law that would require public utilities, and this would include municipal utilities and electric cooperatives, to enter into pole attachment agreements with a law enforcement agency upon the request of the law enforcement agency for those pole attachment agreements. The bill does state that the pole attachment agreement that is entered into, this would be specific for utility poles within the public right-of-way. This would not include electric transmission within easements, leased or easement land. So these pole attachment agreements under the bill would be required to identify where the placement would occur on the utility poles, specify the nature of the device that's going to be attached, establish safety specifications for the attachment, grant the utility the sole discretion to require that the attachment be done by the public utility or by a contractor that's approved by the public utility, and then lastly, require the law enforcement agency to indemnify, defend, and hold harmless the public utility from all liability relating thereto. The bill would authorize the utility to assess reasonable fees for costs that are incurred by the public utility for this attachment and operation of these law enforcement devices. And it would prohibit the public utility from charging for the space or renting the space on the utility pole for the attachment. The law enforcement agency would be required to warrant and guarantee that any device that's attached on a utility pole complies with applicable laws and regulations, and the law enforcement agency would be solely responsible to determine whether there's a need for a court order, a warrant to attach this equipment and use it for surveillance purposes. And then the utility would not be held liable for any such failure pertaining to that court process. Lastly, Mr. Chair and committee, any public utility that enters into a pole attachment agreement under the bill would be considered an instrumentality or of a governmental entity under the Tort Claims Act. So a prohibition on liability under the Tort Claims Act and the exceptions that are provided thereunder. And the law enforcement agency would be required to, as I said, indemnify, defend, and hold harmless the public utility for any claims or court actions arising out of these attachment agreements and attachments, and then also for any damages that are incurred from on the utilities systems and infrastructure. And there's some definitions of defined terms there in my memo, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
All right. Any questions for Nick? Representative Smith.
Mr. Chair, Nick, thank you. Did you say who would install these?
So that would be up to the public utility to determine how that installation is done. It would either be the public utility doing it, or they could establish that it has to be a specific contractor approved by the public utility.
And could the utilities okay some spots and not okay other spots?
Yeah, that's a good question. This bill would require a pole attachment agreement to be entered into upon the request of a law enforcement agency. So I'm not so sure on that question there. I assume the utility could identify the appropriate spot to place a device, but I don't know that the utility could severely limit a law enforcement agency in placing a device in a reasonable location.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pole clutter is unsightly, and it's also dangerous. Abandoned equipment hanging on utility poles. Does this bill have any provisions regarding the retirement of this equipment?
So it does say these pole attachment agreements are need to have provisions with respect to the removal of the equipment So that it would be within the agreement itself that would determine the removal process.
Thank you. I missed that in my review of the bill. Appreciate it.
Very good question. Further questions? All right, thank you, Nick. First up, we've got Jeremy Knoll. Is it Knoll or Noel? Knoll with Kansas State Lodge for Fraternal Order of Police. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you guys today in reference to House Bill 2109. My name is Jeremy Knoll. I'm a forensic investigator with the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office. And I'm here today to testify in my capacity as a vice president for the Kansas State Fraternal Order of Police. We represent over 4,200 law enforcement officers across the state of Kansas. Utility pole technology, law enforcement technology that we can deploy on utility poles is quite invaluable for law enforcement. It's an opportunity for us to obtain intelligence and investigative leads that we otherwise wouldn't be able to obtain through other means of surveillance or investigation. It enhances public safety and it strengthens the agency's ability to monitor high crime areas. If we can determine where, let's say, there's a group of individuals who are stealing trailers or vehicles, and we know that they're going to that same location, we can use utility pole technology to monitor this area and watch it, and again, develop further investigative leads. Law enforcement technology on utility poles can also provide us with real-time information and situational awareness. If there's a large event, a large gathering, we can utilize technology on a utility pole to monitor these events. And then we can relay that information to the officers that are on the ground. And we can be, it's a force multiplier for us, because then we can navigate those officers on the ground to the specific areas that we need the coverage. We can also strategically place this equipment to help to optimize those policing efforts. When we have identified an area that we need to perform some surveillance, and we cannot do that surveillance from regular ground techniques, that's where this technology comes in quite handy for us. Utility mounted equipment can be rapidly deployed as well. If we have identified an area where we know there are vehicles that are actively being dismantled, taken apart, we can quickly get up cameras in that area on a utility pole to monitor that situation. It's also a cost-effective solution because we can use the existing infrastructure that the utility companies already have set up that are in the public right-of-way. We don't have to install any new equipment. There's, other than the law enforcement technology that we're going to put on that utility pole, but we don't have to install new poles or any other kind of infrastructure because it's already in existence. This bill also reduces the legal exposure for utility companies because law enforcement will then assume the liability. And I think that's a big key factor in this bill. Utilizing the existing infrastructure for public safety purposes represents a fiscal responsibility as well. For these reasons, we strongly recommend passage of House Bill 2109. Thank you for your time, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry I was late. My keys were locked in my car. Different subject, but anyway, thank you for your testimony. I just wanted to make sure that I understand, does the utility companies will be installing it and removing the cameras?
That is part of the agreement that we will discuss when we sit down to talk about the agreement that we're going to have with the utility company. Are they going to install the equipment, or will a subcontractor do that?
Right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Further questions? All right. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Next up, familiar face around the halls here, Mr. Klump. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Ed Klump, representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Peace Officers Association. And we are here today in support of this bill. This is technology that's been used for decades. It's been around for a very long time. I won't tell you how long, but I'll tell you that we were using it when I was an officer yet, and that's been a while now. And so it's been around for a long time. It's an incredibly useful tool. One of the biggest challenges we have in cities with public safety and public order is when things start happening in neighborhoods, when we have street drug sales going on, when we have gang activity going on, when we start having drive-by shootings, just any number of things. And this is primarily where pole cameras got their start. And of course now the technology, like everything else, has advanced tremendously. And so it continues to be a very useful tool. And that's why we're here today. For many years, utility companies have worked with us on these issues, and we've been able to resolve the differences of opinion on, who to install, where to install, safety of the workers, and all those things. And a couple of years ago, there was a series of lawsuits that happened over in Missouri, as I understand, which is what brought us to this point, where people were trying to sue the electrical companies that were allowing us to put up these cameras based on the legality of our use of the device. It didn't have anything to do with what the electric company did. It had nothing to do with the installation. It had nothing to do with any defect or camera falling off a pole or anything like that. It was strictly, they were trying to drag the utility companies into the lawsuits against law enforcement. In response to that, the utility companies naturally became a little skeptical about assisting us doing this because that's an expense to them. Even when you win a lawsuit, you spend a lot of money. And so it was understandable. We understood their plight, and so that's what brings us here today. That's what this bill is trying to fix. I want to point out, Representative Smith, you asked about, I believe it was the installation or the limits that the utility company has on this. And if you look on lines 18 or 19 of page 1 of the bill, especially 19 to 20, the agreement will contain any other provision related to the safe installation and use of the equipment in the utility pole. So that's a pretty broad encompassing statement. And so if they have any issues involving even safety of their workers getting in there and installing the device, then that's going to be part of the agreement. How are we going to deal with those things? So if you look at most of page 1 is all about what goes in that agreement. And it's pretty wide open that if there's any concerns, we're going to work it out in the agreement before we go in and do this. What this bill does is forces everybody to come to the table and work on the agreement and try to work out those differences. And so those things we feel are addressed in the bill. One of the key things that I heard from utility companies as we've been discussing this bill the last couple of years is safety of their workers, and we are totally all on board with that. We talk about drive-by shootings and things. We're taking them into areas that we have to be concerned about. That's what we're trying to address. We believe this bill is what's needed to get us back on track with being able to use this. I have seen the results in neighborhoods that were literally, people were sheltering in their homes, neighborhoods with a large number of residences that were resident-owned, occupant-owned residences who had sheltered themselves in place because of the activities that were going on in their neighborhood. And when we come in with this kind of technology and we knock that out, when we knock the street drug sales out, when we knock the gang activity out surrounding that, when we knock off the people that are involved in drive-bys and stuff like that, we see those neighborhoods flourish again. People come out of their homes, they start planting gardens again, they start painting their front porches again, they start keeping their property taken care of. And so that's what we're trying to achieve when we use these kind of devices, is restore that order and confidence in people in their neighborhoods. And I'll stand for questions when it's appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Klump. Questions, Representative Smith?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Klump, Chief. What I was wondering is, like I've been in a school, there'll be 8 cameras. So the secretary can look at 8 hallways and see what's going on within the whole school. You'll have hundreds of cameras. So, from the PlayStation, can they turn on just one location, or do they keep all the film in that one spot? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
It makes perfect sense what you're asking. If I could, I'm going to defer to Jeremy on that because he has more hands-on with the newer technology. I think he can answer that better than I can.
Can I ask one more question then before we go? In these rough neighborhoods, do you see a lot of vandalism on that type of equipment?
You know, it happens on occasion. I think Jeremy may be able to experience with what some of their experience is with it better than I can. But you know, that's always an issue. But it's part of the risk you have to accept with doing these kind of operations.
Thanks, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Smith, I believe I have not heard of any issues with vandalizing of the equipment that we've ever had installed. As for the storage of the data, it depends. It depends on what that technology is. And so if it's just a regular camera, that information could be transmitted to a secured location where there are detectives physically watching that video live. So maybe it's not actually being recorded. It is just a live feed. So we have people watching those cameras and they're taking notes as things are occurring. Or it could be going to a server. It could be stored on some server somewhere. And then it's up to that agency and their IT security policies to protect that data.
Well, if there was a problem, then they can go back to the server and pull up that time frame and look at it and maybe pick up whatever evidence they need.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carmichael. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to have some questions for my friend, Mr. Klump, please. And by the way, Mr. Chair, I do not intend to go through the questions that Chief Sullivan and I went through last year about hacking of these images by law enforcement officers from all over the country, hacking data from Wichita, Kansas, nor about the reverse engineering of the Motorola devices now so that you can watch these videos and look at the tag streams from all over the country from the comfort of your own home and figure out where your ex-wife is. I'm not going to do that, Mr. Klump. But what I am concerned about today is, as I understand it, law enforcement officers, wherever they have a right to legally be, they have a right to see, observe, and hear whatever they can. So they could stand in front of my house and look into my backyard. I think that's general principle constitutional law, isn't it?
Correct.
And these cameras are sort of an outgrowth of that. If the officer can stand in the yard and look into your backyard, then we could put a camera, in this instance, on the right-of-way and peer into my backyard.
Correct.
So under this legislation, we are facilitating the opportunity for the investigator, Chief Sullivan, perhaps Chris Kobach, to put a camera on the Evergy pole in the right-of-way adjacent to the street, 150 foot from my backyard, and monitor what I do in my backyard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's what this allows for, isn't it, Ed?
It does, but it's not unfettered access. There's still the issue in case law is the expectation of privacy. There's been some interesting case law develop on that. The case law is starting to talk, 10th Circuit starting to talk about the transition of that expectation with all the technology that's around today. So if we are setting a camera up and we're going to be looking into have a view of an area that kind of goes into that expectation of privacy, in those cases we would have to get a search warrant in order to activate the camera in those settings. Now, there's pretty strong case law right now. The most recent in the 10th Circuit that I'm aware of is a case called U.S. versus Hay, which was a 2024 case. And what they said in that case is, we have already concluded that the use of a poll camera does not constitute search if the camera can only capture activity in public view. In United States versus Jackson, we held that the use of the video equipment and cameras to record activity visible to the naked eye does not ordinarily violate the Fourth Amendment. We reasoned that activity a person knowingly exposes to the public is not a subject of Fourth Amendment, and that the poll cameras at issue in this case were incapable of viewing inside houses and were capable of observing only what passerbys could easily have been able to observe. So there's case law that we follow on that, and when we are approaching that area where we feel like we may need a search warrant, we'll get a search warrant.
I take it Kansas law enforcement doesn't have any objection to those principles of protecting me from peering by Chief Sullivan into my backyard. It sounds like you're okay with that.
We adhere to those principles the best we can.
Well, I understand.
Moving target, but.
I understand, and I don't want to take any more time, Mr. Chair, but if y'all don't have a problem with this, then we need to put some statutory protections in this statute just to make sure that an errant or poorly informed attorney general doesn't peer into my backyard to watch me pet my dog. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Melton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ed. Will any other agencies besides local law enforcement be able to access the cameras?
I don't think that would be normal at all. No, I've never heard of that happening.
Thank you.
I believe we have a rep online, Mr. Penn.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
There you go. We can hear you.
Hey, good morning, committee, and Mr. Chairman. I thank you guys for allowing me to speak remotely here. And I want to commend Mr. Klump because he brought up a point that I would like to make as well pertaining to the boogeyman of the Fourth Amendment and any camera polls and unreasonable search and seizure. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, and Mr. Klump, you can add in if this is something that you would like to speak on further or expand. I want to gently caution all the colleagues on the committee to pay no heed to, the off-base brains of bad babblers with blotchy reasonings and barrister backgrounds, because in U.S. v. Hay, which is, I want you to look it up, case number 22, TAC 3276, U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th District of Kansas. It was written and published on March 19th, 2024. And I would direct you to pages 12 through 24. I took a look at it dealing with the Fourth Amendment and the case law that is cited in there, U.S. v. Jackson. All of those things have the folks who are bringing this to us in the right. And I think that, as I spoke on this bill last time, Wichita PD did an admirable, exemplary job of coming to my own home when threats were made against my life and the life of my family. After we took a vote that some disagreed with, my name was published in the newspapers, and there were threats made against my life and the other members of the legislature, and they had to come into my son's room because we did not have this capability, and they had to set up cameras in my kid's room and move their room around just so we could find out who it was that was coming by the house, who was making these threats. If we actually, look at moving this bill forward and getting it across to the governor's desk, that type of thing for all legislators of any political stripe could go a long way to making sure that their families are safe, the same way that WPD and our law enforcement community did such a great job of making sure mine is safe. So again, Fourth Amendment, we're game tight on it. And I'll get back to what you guys have going on. Thank you.
You said, I'm sorry, I missed the question. I didn't hear a question,
Did you have
Mr.
a
Chair.
question, Representative, or just needed to make the comments? Okay. Further questions? Representative Smith.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. In Pittsburgh, I had a friend whose truck was stolen. They found it right away because they had a camera on the license, and they were able to trace it down within an hour. I was wondering, we have a lot of cameras in Pittsburgh. How many cameras would a Wichita have, or how many cameras would a Kansas City, Kansas have?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Smith, I think we're confusing two issues here. We're not talking about license plate reading cameras here. These are cameras that are used sporadically. I doubt that at any given time, you could say there's more than one or two of these in any community the size of Topeka. I'm not sure about one the size of Wichita. We use them sparingly. So this isn't something where we have 10 or 12 of these cameras out, let alone hundreds. This is a different type of system, different purpose, and different operation altogether. So this has nothing to do with license plate readers. They might be able to pick up a license tag number, but these systems are not those that will automatically look that tag up, run it, or anything like that. It would be something we go back, we can see the tag number on a vehicle that comes into an area perhaps and engages in criminal activity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Further questions? Okay, not seeing any. I've got a question, kind of a follow-up to the discussion earlier. Today, this bill is not in effect. Today, can you put this equipment on utility poles, say owned by Evergy, with their permission?
I don't think there's anything prohibiting us from doing it with their permission. The problem is that they're trying to protect their legal interests by denying this in most cases. I'm not even sure I could say they're denied in every case. I think we could probably go and plead a particular urgent need, and they might allow that. And then Evergy's not the only company we deal with. We have the rural utilities.
Just wanted to pick on them because they're in
Yeah.
the room, but so if you could do it today with their permission, what is the purpose of this bill?
Well, the roadblock we have right now is this liability issue, which they rightfully want to try to address. And that's what this bill's main purpose is. And in order to get there, then that kind of, you know how it is. You have other surrounding issues you got to address in the.
So it's the hold harmless, which I read in this bill.
That's the primary thing we're going after. That's the primary concern that utility companies have voiced for us. And all the other concerns we've always been able to work out. But this is one we can't work out without legislation.
Okay. Next question I've got would be to the reviser, Mr. Myers. Can you show me in this bill where it specifically says mounting cameras on poles?
Well, so this bill only, I think the language used in the bill is only law enforcement equipment.
I would agree with that, because we keep getting off on the, so there is more equipment out there than just cameras. I mean, there's gunshot detections, there's other stuff out there. Is that a true statement, Mr. Klump?
I believe there is. I'm not sure how that equipment gets mounted, whether we're using any public utility poles for those or other methods. I'm just not.
But that would fall under this bill.
But there are other things that we do that with.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
I will point out there is on line 20 of page 2, it does talk about a public utility that enters into a pole attachment agreement. So the word pole is in there someplace, not specifically, I think, where you were directing.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other proponents who would like to speak? Seeing any, I do show proponent written only from Chief Joseph Sullivan, Wichita Police Department, and Mark Ingholm, I hope I pronounced that right, State Fire Marshal. Do we have any neutral testimony? Not seeing any. I'm showing written only from Joseph Estraub with CURB and KDOT. Is there anybody who would like to speak as an opponent on this? Not seeing any. All right. Thank you for hearing us on that. I am going to close the hearing on House Bill 2109. With that, I'd like to do a final action on House Bill 2040. If I could get Mr. Myers to go tell us what 2040 does.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, recall that House Bill 2040, this is the bill that would extend the deadline for the KCC, the Kansas Corporation Commission, to issue a final order in a transmission line siting application. So current law provides the KCC with 120 days to issue a final order in a transmission line siting permit and routing application. This bill would increase that deadline to 180 days.
Committee, any questions to the revisor? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the purpose of discussion, I would move that we pass out House Bill 2040 favorable for passage.
You heard the motion. Do we have a second? Representative Smith shows a second. With that, is there further discussion? Pretty quiet. And it's a pretty simple bill. We are simply changing some date timelines there. So with that, all in favor of passing? Oh, my bad. Would you like Miss Neighbor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I close.
All right. Thank you for calling me out on that one. Okay, you've heard the motion on House Bill 2040. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Carmichael.
Mr. Chair, I ask that my affirmative vote be recorded in the minutes of this meeting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Would anyone else like their affirmative votes recorded? All right. Well, that pretty much took care of that. Was easy. So with that, the next meeting will be Thursday, February 6th. And we're going to have a presentation by the SPP, Mike Ross, Senior VP. And we are also going to hear a hearing on House Bill 2110, which is eliminating the requirement that the state 911 board shall contract with local collection point administrator services for rescheduling on the dates, et cetera. I'm hoping, I think you, Mr. Carmichael, you sit on the 911 board. Is that a correct statement?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so look forward to hearing your testimony and guidance.
My hope is Ms. Massey, the executive director, will be with us. She works much harder than I do, Mr. Chair.
So, and we may have some final actions on a couple of the bills that we've heard. We're going to see what we move forward here. But all right, any questions? With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.